I'm Bob Mattison, and been doing some segmented bowl work since 2017. I think there's quite a few people in here that have done segmented work. Can you raise your hand if you're a segmented turner? If you have any interest in it, what I'm going to do tonight is just go through some of sort of the basics, and then one of the things I'm going to work on in the middle, or for the rest of the night, is how to make feature rings, which is one of the key components of some of the segmented work that we do. Number one, some people don't like feature rings. I know that some people like to do segmented work, and they feature primarily the different kinds of grain structure, grain patterns, or shapes, or whatever. If you're interested in something a little bit different, the feature rings give you an opportunity to make a lot of changes or make things look a little bit different. So one of the things that I've noticed over the years is that certain people like Steve Sinner are very good at coming up with a shape that is unique and is identifiable to them. And so what I've done is taken a copy of a person, that guy by the name of Jim Rogers, who was online, and he's given me a lot of the ideas as far as the shapes and so on that I've tried to mimic and make different kinds of changes as we go through. So for those who have not done segmented work in the past, it's a good idea to get a shape of what you would like the bowl or the turning to look like. And so once you have a shape, what you can do then is come up with a schematic drawing showing you the actual cut list or items that you can use to help you cut your pieces of wood as you go through. So there's basically three components to cutting a segment. Number one is the thickness, and I've sort of worked with 3/4 of an inch on most of my turnings as we go through. The second key component is that of the segment length, the actual diameter of your bowl, your finished bowl. There's a little bit of trigonometry involved there, so what you can do is you can measure either the radius or the diameter. In my particular case, I've used the diameter. And on my feature ring number 5, which I'm going through, it has a diameter of 5 1/4 inches. So if you multiply 5 1/4 by pi and divide it by 12, you come up with a segment length, in this particular case, of about 1 3/8. Not about, it's 1 3/8. And so I'm going to talk a little bit tonight some of the advantages of different segment lengths, number of segments. So for example, what is the difference between a 12 segment ring and a 24 segment ring? I have some examples I'm going to show you tonight as well, and make some changes as we go through. The other thing that you want to work with on segments is how many segments you like to use. So some people, like myself, I do most of my work in either 12 or some kind of a factor of 12, 6, 24, 48, whatever. Some people do 18 segments. So they would have in that, or 16, I'm sorry, 16 segments per ring, which would give you an 8 or whatever. So as you go through, there's different ways of creating this piece of wood, this segment, one of which is a cutting sled like I have here. And so on a 12 segment ring, on 30 or 360 degree ring, if I've got 12 segments, that gives me an angle of 30 degrees per joint. Well, you have 2 points to that joint, so you're actually working with 15 degrees as far as the segment length as you're going through on each one of them. And so what you can do is come up, and it's a key to have a nice, something like a saw stop. This is all done on the table saw. So this allows me to change the length as far as away from the blade that I'm cutting. And so the first cut that you make is of your 15 degrees. You come through like so. And then from there, what you can do on your next cut is you put it up against the saw stop, and you flip it over, and you make another cut. You flip it over, you make another cut, and you wind up with something that looks like the ring and so on that we have here. I don't know if we can see that on this side or not. Can we switch over to the table? Okay. So you wind up with a ring that looks like this. One of the disadvantages of using something like a miter gauge or a miter sled and so on like this is when you start talking about 24 cuts or 32 cuts on a bowl, that gives you the opportunity of making more mistakes. So if you're a 32nd of a degree off, or 32nd of an inch off, you multiply that by 24 and all of a sudden you're all out of whack. If you're using a 15 degree sled to come up and make your cuts with you, if you're not exactly 15 degrees, which I can get down to like a half a degree or a quarter degree, you wind up with something that's not quite where you want it to be at. So there are different ways of actually making cuts that we can go through. And I'm going to put this here for a second. So this is a little bit different way. It's basically the same idea as what I had before, but you can get this angle very nicely at the 15 degrees and so on that you're working with. Through a little bit of online, you can look at ways of getting a cutting sled or whatever to actually be the exact degrees and so on that you want. And so this is something that you can use for something like that as well. So again, what you're looking at is your first cut would be a angle that you're looking at on the 15 degrees. Your second cut would be up against the stop. You'd flip it over and do your next cut, and these would be thrown off as you go through. And this gives you a little bit more control over the actual angles as you're coming through. It's closer to the true 15 degrees that you're looking for. The disadvantage of something like this is if you go from a 12 segment ring to a 24 segment ring, all of a sudden you have to go from 15 degrees to 7.5. So you make another sled. And if you want any of the others that go through, you wind up with a bunch of sleds. Something that they came out with 10 years ago is something called a wedgie sled. And basically, what it allows you to do is to take a 15 degree, in this particular case it's a 30 degree triangle, 60 triangle, and you can take your wedgie sled and both of these items move as we go through here. And what you can do is you can put your triangle in here so it's a good fit. There we go. Where am I at here? Here's what I'm looking for. So in this particular configuration, it's good for a 12-segment ring. A little bit different, what you wind up doing is you put a piece of wood and your sled like so. Make your first cut using your saw stop as you come up. And when you make your second cut, you move the sled up to the top. You make your third cut, you move it back. The fourth cut, you move it back, and so on. So it's a good idea to mark your piece of wood as you have with a black line on one side and a black line on the other, so that when you put your pieces together, you know which way they're facing. So in this particular case, so hopefully I won't drop everything, but I think I'm going to. So what you wind up with is all of your black lines are on the top, and on the outside you have an alternating line on the inside and outside. The advantage of doing something like this is you have something called complementary angles. So you wind up, your saw blade can be tilted a little bit or whatever, and so you wind up with a very, very tight ring every time you go through using something like a wedgie sled versus a cutting sled or as just a normal miter sled as you go through as well.
Are you saying say on your table saw,
Yep.
if the blade is slightly out of whack a little bit, by doing it that way, you compensate for that?
It compensates for that as you go through. So your blade can be a little bit off. As long as you mark the top and the front and you put together the wedgie sled to put together the segments in the right way, all that is taken into consideration and compensated for you as you go through.
One of the things, I use a sled like that, but instead of putting wood up against instead of putting the top piece up against the inside, put it on the outside, and then you go back and forth like that. It's the same way you do what you're doing, but the force of the blade won't push your top piece away.
Okay, that's a good point. Good point. So, the other thing I like about the wedgie sled, for as much of it as I can use, is that this one is a sled. It's made by a company called Seg-Easy, and this is a Seg-Easy 24. So what you do is you come up and you change your sled, and you put your
You bought that sled, or did you make it?
I made this sled. So you can put in your 24 segment item, and now the same sled can be used for a 24 segment ring as you go through. Same advantages as far as being able to do compensating work and so on. So the rings are tight. So they have these in 8, 12, 24, 16, whatever you would like. 48, I think, is the largest as you go through. So this is a sled that you can use for the majority of the work as you go through, as we're working with here. So once you come up with your segments, what you can do, let's see here. There we go.
Would it help if we took that off of there for you?
No, that's fine. So once you come up with all of your segments and as they're cut, what I do is I use painter's tape and use a straight edge along to put that against, and then put down my pieces as close together as they go through until I get my 12 or 24 ring or whatever I'm coming through. And then I put some glue in each one of the segments using a putty knife, and this simply goes together like so. and I put a radiator clamp on it, and I put a gluing slate on top and put one on the bottom, clamp these two together, and you wind up with a ring that basically looks like this. And so, as I was mentioning before, when we are actually making the actual bowl, your segment lengths are going to be different for each one of the layers as you go through to help you shape your bowl. And so this one, both of these have been glued up, and then I put them through a thickness sander to help me get them flat for actually gluing itself. So once the rings are glued and put together, I glue them up in two different segments. So I put them on the lathe and glue each bowl, or there was a thing called a stomper that I brought in a couple of months ago or whatever that helps you align these as far as actually getting them glued and put together. So once you've got that done, you can put them on the lathe and actually do your turning on the outside. And then when you're finished turning on the outside, you can do the inside of one, do the inside of the other, and actually glue them together and finish up your bowl from there. So that's sort of the basic bowl idea of how you do some of the segmented work. And when it comes to feature rings, you can be as simple or as extravagant, detailed as you want. So this is the first one I made in 2017, and basically it's a different color wood. So that's the only thing that's different about this particular piece, and it's all done in the glue up. So very, very simple to do as far as actually featuring as you go through. An alternative is to do something like this, which is a checkerboard. So this particular one is maple and walnut as you go through, and that's one way of doing it. To get a little bit more detail, you can do the same thing using a 24 segment ring versus the 12, and so on as we have here. So yes.
How does that look if you do a 12-piece ring and a 24-piece in the same piece? Is it not a good idea, or do the things, will they still line up?
It's an excellent question, okay? And so we're going to get into some of the different segments and some of the different bowls. And one of the first ones, easiest to make, is something called the Greek key, okay? And I'll show how to do that in a little bit. So to answer your question, Tim, this is a 12-segment bowl with a 12-segment feature ring. This is a 12-segment bowl with a 24-key, 24-segment feature ring.
I've seen on this one that they perfectly line up. I didn't know how that would work, but you get two pieces
Per segment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's the advantage of the wedgie sled and so on as you go through. So one of the things as far as the Greek key is concerned is the way that that's made is your segment or your wood and so on that you have to make the featuring itself is basically laminated. So on this first one that I had is that the ring, the actual wood itself, is 3/4 of an inch in thick, and so the 1/2 or the part of the Greek key is 3/8. Okay, and so you wind up with half of the featuring as you go through. And so what you can do is you use your wedgie sled to create your segments. They come off of the sled and look something like this. Okay. And to make the Greek key, all you do is you flip one. And it goes like that. And this piece of wood that you use as far as the lighter piece of wood is concerned, just like I've done here, before you actually laminate the wood, you can also cut off pieces that are the same width. That's already determined here, but you can do a different length. And as you wind up with, you have something like that looks like that. Okay, and as you can see, that's the beginning of your Greek key. And I've gotten one that I've already not glued up, but I've got it in the rings ready to clamp and so on, as far as how that is actually done. Any questions on that? The next one I did is something called a Thunderbird. And before I go there, one of the advantages of like the Greek key is that the cutting is actually something that is very simple to do, basically flipping it back and forth like you do on the wedgie sled to cut it. So you can use the wedgie sled actually to make a 12 or a 24 segment ring without having to do any extra work as far as getting the length and so on. On the Greek key, one of the other things I forgot to mention is that in this particular case, I've got a 5/8 piece of wood with a 1/8, which gives me my, my 3/4 of an inch thickness as we go through here. And the segment, as I mentioned, you have is along the side, but if you have a, first one was like a 1 3/8 inch width, then what you're going to do is you're going to reduce that segment length, edge length, by the thickness of your piece of wood that you're putting in. So like on the ones that I have here, the smaller ones, to answer your question, Tim, for example, this is 1 3/8. Half of that is 11/16. So my segment length would be actually 7/16 because I'm going to take, and I want to put in that 1/8 inch piece as we go through here. So when you put those together, they turn up to be the 1 3/8 that you have on everything else that you go through. Does that make sense? Questions on that? Okay. The second one I made, third one I guess, it's called a Thunderbird. And this one's sort of fun in that you can come up with a piece of wood and any angle will work. In this particular case, I used 30 degrees. Used my sled to come up with a 30-degree cut. It gives me a triangle that I can then sandwich between the same thicknesses of wood, different species. It gives me a triangle that looks like so. Okay? And when you glue those up, you have something like that. And from there, what I've done is basically gone to my table saw and taken this piece of wood, have my fence over here, my saw stop over here that allows me to run the piece through and gives me an 1/8 of an inch cut on the actual piece of wood. So I've got my regular piece of wood, I've got my 1/8 of an inch piece, I've got an 1/8 of an inch thickness on my blade, so I've got an 1/8 of an inch gone there. So then you wind up in doing your second cut, and your third cut, and your fourth cut to come up with something that looks like that, okay?
So you're taking into consideration
Your
scrap from the cut of the curve of the
Right.
saw.
So that if I put those together, you can see where they're not the same length as you go through. So what you can do now is you can take this top one, which is basically the head, and you can take the bottom one and flip it around, and you can take your next one and you can flip it around, and you can take your last one come on. You have something that looks like a Thunderbird. And you can then take two just blank pieces of wood, or just the same species of wood, nothing done, and you wind up with something that looks like that. Yes?
Question I could ask, when I tried doing this, the joints are extremely fragile.
Okay.
I wound up a mess, and I couldn't get my Thunderbird to work.
Okay.
How do you prevent that?
What I do is that I do glue it. But I clamp it down very tightly. And so in this particular case, I put a clamp on each side and then a clamp in the middle, and I've not had a problem with it. The key that I found in order to do that is to make sure that you have a sharp blade when you go through it and get it done.
When you go to cut those, after you get that glued together, how do you come up with, you just measure it by hand to know what center, like the center of the head this way and this way, so that that's in the center of that piece?
That's a good question.
You notice I have a lot of good questions.
That's right. One of the other things I like about the Thunderbird, just a little bit more detail, is the use of a veneer for both the top and the bottom. As far as sandwiching, gives it a little bit more elegance, or I don't know if that's a good word to use or whatever, but just a little nicer detail as far as the actual piece itself. So I cut all of my Thunderbirds at the same time. I borrowed my wife's cupcake pan, and so I had like I had 8 use for six Thunderbirds in each one of my pieces. So I usually cut anywhere from 8 to 10 Thunderbirds at one time. So if they do break, or you have something that falls apart or whatever, you've got an extra one to go through as you want. So once you have everything glued up, what I do is I mark the center, and if I want to go 1 3/8, I do an 11/16 from the side, and I use my sled and come through and can put my 15-degree angle on one side. I do them all at the same time, and then when I do the second side, I get my sled over.
So
and
really,
then-
your first cut, once you do that, the second one's easy because you go to the length, total length that you've already got set up.
Right, right. And so what I also have done, since most of my work is done where it's 1 3/8, I've actually made stop blocks so that I have my blade here, and I can put in my stop block along the saw stop and my blade, and it's always right on at each one of the points as you go through. So I actually won this sled at one of the drawings many, many years ago as we go through. And one of the things I like about it is that when you're doing segment lengths and so on, it's nice to have the item here, but when you're wanting to do the second cut, I don't see one here, but when you're wanting to do the second cut, here we go. So I go through and do my first cut like so, okay? Do the second cut. This is actually set up where you can flip this around. Has the 15 degrees on the other side of it. Gives you the right length, but it also gives you a little bit of safety concern as it holds the piece of wood in there as you go through, okay? And so always use like an Allen wrench or something like that to hold it down as you're using it, but it allows you to come up with your segments as you go through. So. Any questions on that? Okay. The last one is something called a zigzag. And as you can see, it is a 12-segment ring. But going back to your question, is a 24-segment zigzag as you go through. And so this is a little bit more difficult in that you have basically 5 pieces of wood that you're laminating. The middle one is walnut. I've got 2 maple veneer strips on each side, and then cherry on the outside. And so what it allows you to do is to use your miter sled, and with the right angle, you come up and you have something that looks like this when you're first cutting it. Then at the end, what you do is you go in and do something like this. That gives you that zigzag pattern that I was looking for. Okay? And so after you have, in this particular case, there's 24 segments that you're working with on that. What you can do is you come up and use a cutting sled on your table saw. And if you're going to be making a lot of them, it's best to have the same width, same length, and so on as you're going through. Again, 3/4 of an inch is the thing that I was going for in this particular case. So what I want to do is I want to leave a little bit of room at both the top and the bottom for either looks, if you want to go all the way up, or it also allows you to get your piece that you're looking for and sand it down before you do some of the other work on it.
Those accent rings, when you do them like this, if you make, say, you said all your pieces are 3/4 thick, by making that accent ring a little thinner or a little thicker, it's not going to affect, other than the sight, looking at it, but as far as it lining up and everything, if it's a little bit wider, would it matter?
No, and again, that's a good question. I've got one other thing I'd like to go into that in about 1 minute. So what you have is the first cut after you get all of your segments in the right width as you go through. You put them on the sled, and this sled is set up so that if I put this against the blade on my table saw and this the fence on my table saw, and I go through and it cuts off all these pieces in the right length as we go through. And I use a hold down strip in order to make sure that I'm safe on that side. Then once I make that cut, I have a second sled that you have like so, and this gets flipped over where these are cut off, and I have the second sled that gives me the capabilities of winding up with the same pieces as I always go through. Okay? Now, you have a choice on how you like that ring to look like, how you want the zigzags and so on to look like. So what I've done is I've created a line that would be the actual thickness of my segment, the highlight and the ring as you go through. And I have a reason for having two different heights, two different thicknesses on the ring. And as I mentioned before, I usually use 3/4 of an inch on the ring itself. And so in order to come up with something that looks like this, which is 3/4 of an inch, I have a piece of paper that I've cut a 3/4 of an inch by, in this particular case, 11/16 inch wide, which is what I want for my segment ring. And so I can come across and I can run that line from basically the top here down to what I want it to look like. So it can either go horizontal or you can put as much slant on that line as you want in this particular case. That makes sense. Makes sense? Okay, so once you have it done here, you can mark your line on your paper on the side, and that gives you your angle that you can then use on your sled to come up with the right angle and the right slope on your segment that you're doing, in that particular case on the zigzag. And so in this particular case, I'm using about a 37-degree angle as I go through. And that gives me a nice ring. Now, one of the other things I've done is that once I've come up with a zigzag, I actually made one that's 7/8 of an inch in thickness. And the reason for doing that is this is then like 43 degrees that I'm working with on that larger ring. Is what I can do then is I can take my ring that I have here and actually put it on end and run it through the bandsaw, cutting it in half and rotating it 1/2 segment, and I will come up with something that looks like a diamond. So same zigzag that you're going through, but with a split in the ring and glued together, gives you the capabilities of doing a diamond on something like that. So I see questions in their faces. Any other thoughts? Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.